Welcome back. You're watching Newslink. The South African National Defence Force's ability to deploy could be significantly diminished. That's according to the Joint Standing Committee on Defence. It says the feeder system currently in place for the defence establishment isn't providing sufficient manpower. The committee says it recognises government funding constraints, but alternative solutions need to be found if the Defence Force is to function effectively and not face paralysis. It says initiatives like military skills development systems and the University Reserve Training Program are helpful, but they don't provide the exact solutions. For more on the story, we're joined by the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Defence, Mr. Cyril Xaba. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. And let's speak about the capacity of the National Defence Force, the trends that you have all seen over the last few years, before we get into the specifics.
Our responsibility or the mandate as the committee is to investigate and make recommendation regarding the budget, functioning, armaments, morale, and the state of preparedness of the Defence Force. As you know, the budget of the Defence Force has been declining over years. There was a time when it was 4% of the GDP and is now down to 0.7% GDP. And the result is that the army now and much of its support capabilities. The Air Force, most of the aircraft are serviceable. In the Navy, most of the vessels require maintenance. This has indeed diminished the capability of the Defence Force. And now, the number in 2006, the force was 30% of the entire budget, and now it has gone down to about 70% of the entire budget. So it means that the personnel cost has actually squeezed out other capabilities. Not that it increased because the budget was also increasing. The reason why it moved from 38% of the budget to 70% is because the Defence Force budget has been decreasing over the years.
The not there.
And hence now we are saying, no, look, this thing is not sustainable. We need intervention, serious intervention, to bring back the capability that is commensurate with the responsibility of the Defence Force.
Yeah, and let's unpack that a little bit further, because in your answer you've described that the feeder system that's currently in place is not adequate. What is the current feeder system, and what needs to change to make it more, rather to increase the capacity of the military?
Well, look, you remember that back then, before 1994, we had what was known as conscription. The conscription was there to actually ensure that, to provide the reserve force with such military capability. It means that it provided them with expansion capability, and coming with that was certain specialist and scarce skills, science, engineering, and technology capability that came with it. So in other words, people were called up. They call up during that time, conscription. They came with all those skills for collapse. So in other words, the SANDF had a pool of skill that was in abundance. Now, when that fell away, it meant that the SANDF had to actually grow its own timber. Build the skills that it was readily available. And now you can't do that without extra injection of funds into the South African Defence Force. So both the reserves and the regular force were actually providing this one force concept. So yes, you had the lean force, regular force, but it relied largely on the reserve force that provided this expansion capability and the source of all the skills, specialists and the scarce skills that I've just spoken about.
Yeah, and that's an important one. So we need to focus on the skills, but in that, how do we also make sure that we create or improve the morale of soldiers at the moment? There are budgetary constraints that you've just described to us, but also the facilities or the resources to improve on those skills are also lacking. So how do we then create a balance between the skills development, but also making sure that we're able to grow and sustain the morale of the Defence Force?
Yes, you are right that when you have the prime mission equipment and the other support capabilities in the state that they are, you have the dwindling numbers of personnel, and that will impact on the morale of our own soldiers. And also the operational capability, and also increase risk on their side. That is the least expected from the command of the SANDF. So when this thing fell away, the conscription fell away, they then introduced what was known as the military skills development system, and it was launched in 2003, and the intention was to recruit about 10,000 young people for training. But the question was retention, because there was no budget to actually retain them. We were actually retaining fewer people than we recruited. But that then acted, against the idea of creating the feeder system. What's the point of training people that you cannot, the numbers that you affecting the feeder system? And they also introduced the university reserved training program, and that too, it focused largely on high-end skilled people in the universities and so on. And that too, when you have recruited them, you must be in a position to absorb them, but there's no money for their salaries. So all of that now reduces the capability of the Defence Force to recruit. Yes, you can recruit and train, but you can't retain. So we need an injection into the Defence Force so that it's able to retain the people that they are recruiting. Militaries all over the world recruit and retain young people, almost every year. That actually ensures that it rejuvenates the force, so that you don't have a situation of a bulge in the middle age. Because what's the point of having a middle-aged people whom you cannot be able to deploy, and yet at the bottom you can't feed young people through? So you'll have basically numbers that are not going to assist you. And now what is happening, because of the limited budget, they are actually recruiting to actually fill vacancies that have arisen as a result of natural attrition. Look, it means that you are basically maintaining the numbers as they are. Two, you are unable to deal with the bulge that happens in the middle age, and that's the problem. And now when you recruit for natural attrition, it means that you can have more people that you can outsource to the reserve force and build more capability in the reserve force, as it were. So we are in a full catch-22 situation. That's the reason why we said, no, we need to make a joint approach to Treasury and say, with all these challenges, our prime mission equipment in the state that they are, our personnel numbers in the state that they are, with the aging workforce, we now need a new injection into the finances. And this happens when the ordered commitments and the other ad hoc deployments of the Defence Force increase. You have seen the role that the Defence Force has played recently. We are in the DRC, we are in Mozambique, We are also providing engineering capabilities to other departments. We are health capability to other departments, as well. So we've been on the ground during the floods. We've been on the ground during the unrest. All of that requires, a force that is able to rise to the occasion. But they can rise to the occasion if they have this support that is actually dwindling.
And of course, the capability of the South African National Defence Force is critical in the protection of the state. Mr. Cyril Xaba, thank you very much for joining us this morning. He is from the Standing Committee on Defence, speaking to us about capacity in the SA National Defence Force and what needs to change.